My husband compared me to Shrek but worse, and told his coworkers that I was too hideous to bring to his company events. He was frozen when I showed up in their gala as a model. My husband Jerome had been telling everyone at his office that I was hideous for 3 years straight. Every time there was a company event, he'd make the same excuse. My wife Alicia isn't feeling well. She's got another migraine. The truth was he'd told his coworkers I was so unattractive that he was embarrassed to be seen with me in public. His desk buddy Phil thought it was hilarious. Man, Jerome, you really got stuck with a bad one, huh? At least you make enough money that she doesn't have to leave the house. Jerome would laugh along. That's why I work late so much. Less time looking at that face. His boss Richard would join in during lunch meetings. Jerome's wife must be something special if he keeps her hidden away like that. Is she really that unfortunate looking? Jerome would pull out his phone, pretend to scroll for a photo, then shake his head. Trust me, you don't want to see. I'm doing everyone a favor by attending these events alone. Think Shrek, but worse. The whole accounting department knew the running joke. Jerome's invisible, ugly wife. Some of them actually felt bad for him, this successful financial analyst supposedly trapped with a monster at home. They'd pat his shoulder sympathetically when he'd arrive solo at every holiday party, summer picnic, award dinner. What Jerome never mentioned was that I wasn't going to these events because he specifically told me not to. He'd come home and explain that spouses weren't really welcome. It was more of an employee thing, I'd be bored anyway. I believed him for the first year. Then I ran into Phil's wife at the grocery store. She mentioned how strange it was that I never came to any company functions. That's when I learned about the ugly wife story Jerome had been spreading. But I didn't confront him. Instead, I started paying attention. Recording dates, events, the excuses he gave me versus what he told them. The company's biggest event was their annual charity gala in December. Black tie, $500 a plate, all the executives and important clients attended. Jerome told me it was employees only, absolutely no spouses allowed. He told his office I was getting cosmetic surgery that week because even doctors agreed I needed help. The morning of the gala, Jerome spent 2 hours getting ready. He tried on 3 different tuxedos, got a professional shave, even had his shoes specially shined. "You sure you'll be okay alone tonight?" he asked, not looking at me. I know these work things are boring, but it's important for my promotion. I told him I understood. He kissed my forehead quickly and left. What Jerome didn't know was that 6 months ago, I'd been approached by a modeling scout while shopping downtown. The woman, Diana, was the director of Element Modeling Agency. She'd been practically begging me to sign with them. "You have exactly the look our luxury clients want. Classic beauty with interesting features. Please just think about it." I'd turned her down but kept her card. That afternoon, I called Diana. She remembered me immediately. "Alicia, please tell me you've reconsidered. We have a beauty brand campaign that would be perfect for you." "Actually," I said, "I was wondering if you had any events tonight." She laughed. "Funny you should ask. We're actually co-sponsoring a charity gala at the Grand Ballroom. Element provides models for these high-end fundraisers. The hosts love having beautiful people migrating during cocktail hour. You could come as one of our representatives." I arrived at the gala at exactly 7 p.m., wearing a designer gown Diana's team had provided. Hair professionally styled, makeup artist's work that somehow made my supposedly monstrous features camera-ready. Diana introduced me to the other models, all professional, all stunning, and somehow I fit right in. We were instructed to mingle, chat with guests, promote the charity. I was stationed near the silent auction table when I saw Jerome across the room. He was laughing with Richard and Phil, probably telling another ugly wife joke. Phil's wife Catherine was rolling her eyes. Richard's husband James looked uncomfortable. Then Richard spotted me. He grabbed Jerome's arm and pointed. "Look at that woman by the auction table. She's incredible." Jerome turned and saw me. His face went through several expressions. Confusion, recognition, then panic. Phil was already walking over to me. "Excuse me, miss, I don't mean to be forward, but you're absolutely breathtaking. Are you here with someone?" I smiled. "I'm here with Element Modeling Agency. We're sponsoring tonight's event." Richard had joined us. "Element? They only work with top-tier talent. You must be quite successful." "What was your name?" "Alicia," I said, watching Jerome frozen 10 feet away. "Alicia Summers." Catherine suddenly gasped. Her eyes went wide and she grabbed Phil's arm hard enough that he winced. She leaned in close and started whispering fast, her other hand pointing straight at me. Phil's face drained of all color like someone just told him his worst secret got exposed. Jerome stood 10 feet away looking like a statue, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his mouth. I could see his throat working as he tried to swallow, but nothing seemed to go down. His eyes darted between me and his coworkers, probably calculating how bad this was about to get for him. Richard walked toward me with James right beside him, both of them smiling like they had no idea about the panic spreading through Jerome's friend group. Richard extended his hand and introduced himself as Senior Vice President of Operations. He said Element Agency always sent incredible representatives to their events, and this year they really outdid themselves. James nodded and added that the charity would probably raise double their goal just because people wanted to stick around and meet the models. I shook their hands and thanked them, keeping my voice warm and professional like Diana taught me during the quick training session earlier. I talked with Richard and James about the children's hospital we were raising money for tonight. Richard shared that his nephew had been treated there last year, and the care was amazing. James mentioned they'd been supporting this charity for 5 years now. I told them about Element Agency's partnership with the hospital, how we did quarterly fundraising events to support pediatric care. The whole time I was aware of Jerome standing 15 feet away, his face pale and sweaty under the ballroom lights. His eyes had that trapped animal look, darting around for an escape route that didn't exist. Phil kept tugging on Catherine's elbow, trying to pull her toward the bar, but she planted her feet and stared at me with her mouth hanging open slightly. Diana appeared next to me with another woman who had dark hair and the kind of confident smile that put people at ease instantly. Diana introduced her as Gianna Ferrari, one of Element's senior models who'd been with the agency for 8 years. Gianna immediately complimented my dress and said she was glad Diana finally convinced me to join the team. She asked if this was my first event, and when I said yes, she laughed and said I looked like I'd been doing this for years. Diana guided us toward a group of older couples near the donation table, introducing them as major donors who supported multiple charities in the city. Gianna started chatting with them about the hospital's new wing, asking questions and making everyone feel important. She had this natural warmth that made the donors light up, and I tried to copy her approach as I joined the conversation. Jerome moved toward our group, his steps hesitant like he was walking through deep water. His face had gone from pale to gray, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning keeping the ballroom cool. Richard spotted him and waved him over enthusiastically. He told the donors that Jerome was one of their best financial analysts, really brilliant with numbers and projections. Richard put his hand on Jerome's shoulder and said Jerome had been instrumental in their quarterly earnings this year. I extended my hand toward Jerome with the same pleasant smile I'd been giving everyone else tonight. I said it was nice to meet him, keeping my voice light and friendly like we were strangers making polite conversation at a fancy party. Jerome's hand felt damp and cold when it touched mine, his grip weak like he couldn't quite make his fingers work properly. His eyes searched my face, trying to figure out what I was planning to do. Was I going to expose him right here in front of his boss and these important donors? Would I tell everyone about the 3 years of ugly wife jokes and the lies about why I never came to company events? I could see all these questions racing through his mind as he stood there holding my hand for a second too long. I pulled my hand back and asked what exactly he did for the company, keeping my tone curious and polite. He stammered something about financial analysis and quarterly reports, his voice cracking slightly on the words. Catherine marched across the ballroom floor, her heels clicking loud against the marble. She stopped right in front of Jerome and asked where his wife was tonight, her voice carrying across the whole cocktail area. Several people turned to look, including Richard and the donors we'd been talking to. Jerome's face went from gray to red as everyone's attention focused on him. He stammered that his wife wasn't feeling well, the same excuse he'd used at every company event for 3 years. Catherine's eyebrows went up and she said that was interesting, because his wife looked perfectly healthy to her. Phil appeared behind Catherine and grabbed her arm, trying to pull her away, but she shook him off and kept staring at Jerome. I kept my expression pleasant and sympathetic, like I was just another guest feeling bad for this man whose wife was sick at home. I said I hoped his wife felt better soon, that it was such a shame to miss an event like this. Then I turned back to the donors and continued our conversation about the hospital's new pediatric wing, asking questions about the facilities and programs. Jerome mumbled something about needing to use the bathroom and practically ran toward the hallway, his expensive shoes squeaking slightly on the marble floor. Richard watched him go with a confused expression, probably wondering why his star analyst was acting so strange tonight. James leaned over and whispered something to Richard, both of them glancing between me and the direction Jerome had disappeared. Phil grabbed Catherine's elbow again, and this time managed to pull her toward the silent auction table on the far side of the room. I could see them having a heated argument, their voices low but their body language screaming tension. Catherine kept gesturing toward me with sharp, angry movements while Phil tried to calm her down with his hands up in a placating gesture. They both kept glancing in my direction every few seconds, Catherine's face red with what looked like anger or maybe embarrassment. Phil's expression was harder to read, somewhere between panic and damage control. Other guests were starting to notice the drama, whispering to each other and looking between the arguing couple and our group. Gianna leaned close to me and asked quietly if I knew those people, nodding toward Phil and Catherine. I I took a breath and decided honesty was better than pretending. I told her the man in the gray tuxedo who just ran to the bathroom was actually my husband, Jerome. Gianna's eyes went wide and she asked what I meant. I explained quickly that Jerome had been telling everyone at his office for 3 years that I was too hideous to bring to company events, that I looked like something worse than an ogre. I said he'd been making up excuses about why I never attended, telling people I was getting cosmetic surgery or too sick to leave the house. Gianna's mouth fell open and she immediately signaled Diana, who excused herself from the donors and came over looking concerned. I kept my voice steady and explained everything to Diana in short sentences while smiling at a couple walking past us toward the dessert table. Jerome told his coworkers I was too ugly to bring to company events for 3 years. He said I looked worse than an ogre. He told them I was getting cosmetic surgery this week. Diana's face changed completely when I finished talking. Her lips pressed together in a thin line and her eyes got sharp and focused. She touched my arm gently and told me Element Agency had zero tolerance for anyone treating their models with disrespect. She said she would make sure this situation got handled the right way. Her voice was quiet, but I could hear the anger underneath it. Gianna stayed close to my other side and squeezed my hand without saying anything. I felt grateful for both of them standing there like shields while guests walked past us examining the silent auction items. Richard appeared again from the direction of the bathrooms, his forehead wrinkled with concern. He asked if everything was okay because Jerome seemed really upset when he ran off like that. I took a deep breath and felt Diana's hand still on my arm. I decided right then that hiding the truth wasn't helping anyone anymore. Jerome had controlled the story about me for 3 years, and I was done letting him do it. I looked at Richard and told him I was actually Jerome's wife, Alicia. His eyes went wide and his mouth opened slightly. I explained that I only learned recently Jerome had been telling everyone I was too hideous to attend company functions. That's why I never came to any events. Richard's expression went through several changes in about 5 seconds. Confusion first, then understanding, then something that looked like he felt sick. His face settled into a look of complete horror. James moved closer and put his hand on Richard's arm. He said they had been feeling uncomfortable with Jerome's wife jokes for months now. The jokes weren't funny, and they made everyone feel awkward during lunch meetings. Catherine walked over quickly and joined our small circle. She confirmed she had met me at the grocery store and recognized me immediately tonight. She said she had been appalled by how Jerome talked about me at every company event. Her voice got louder as she spoke, and a few nearby guests glanced our way. Richard excused himself quickly and said he needed to find Jerome right away. His expression looked grim and angry as he walked toward the hallway where the bathrooms were located. Diana stayed right next to me and I could feel her presence like solid support. She wasn't going anywhere until she knew I was okay. Gianna squeezed my hand again and leaned close to whisper that I was doing great. Other guests kept circulating around us, chatting about the charity and examining auction items, completely unaware of the drama unfolding near the dessert table. I tried to keep my professional smile in place even though my hands were shaking slightly. About 20 minutes passed while I talked with donors about the hospital's pediatric wing and the importance of the charity. Diana stayed within arm's reach the entire time, occasionally touching my elbow or back in a reassuring way. Then Richard came back through the crowd, Jerome walking behind him looking absolutely miserable. Richard approached me and spoke quietly so only our small group could hear. He asked if I would be willing to speak with him and the company president tomorrow. He said what Jerome did constituted workplace harassment and created a hostile environment, even though I wasn't an employee myself. The company took these matters very seriously, and they needed to investigate properly. I told him I would think about it and let him know. Jerome stood about 10 feet away, avoiding eye contact with everyone. His face looked gray and sweaty under the ballroom lights. Phil appeared from somewhere near the bar area, but he didn't walk over to stand near Jerome like he usually did at company events. Instead, Phil stayed on the opposite side of the room talking to his wife, Catherine. I noticed several other coworkers whispering to each other and glancing in Jerome's direction. The gossip was already spreading through the accounting department. I finished out the rest of the evening doing exactly what Diana had hired me to do. I chatted with donors, promoted the charity, smiled for photos, and represented Element Agency with complete professionalism. Jerome left early through a side door near the coat check, slinking out like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I stayed until the event ended at 11, helping Diana and the other models collect Element's promotional materials from the tables. Several guests complimented me on my poise and asked for my contact information for future events. Diana drove me home in her sleek black car, asking questions about whether I felt safe going back to the house. She came inside with me and checked all the rooms to make sure Jerome wasn't there. He wasn't home yet, and I had no idea where he went. Diana sat down on the couch and asked directly if I wanted to press charges or pursue legal action against Jerome. She said Element had corporate attorneys who handled harassment cases, and they would be happy to help me. The offer was genuine, and I could tell she meant every word. I told Diana I needed to think about everything and would call her tomorrow. She hugged me at the door and made me promise to text her if I needed anything during the night. After she left, I walked through the empty house, checking each room like she had done. Jerome's car wasn't in the garage, and his phone went straight to voicemail when I called. I changed out of the gown into comfortable clothes and packed a small bag with essentials just in case I needed to leave quickly. The guest room had a lock on the door, so I brought my bag there and made up the bed with fresh sheets. I sat on the edge of the mattress staring at my phone, wondering where Jerome went and whether he would come home at all tonight. Part of me hoped he wouldn't, because I had no idea what to say to him after everything that happened at the gala. The other part wanted him to walk through the door so I could finally confront him about 3 years of lies and humiliation. My phone buzzed around midnight with a text from Gianna asking if I was okay and saying she was thinking about me. I texted back that I was home and safe, just processing everything. She responded immediately saying I could call her anytime, even in the middle of the night if I needed to talk. Having someone I barely knew show me more kindness than my own husband had in years made my chest tight. I locked the guest room door and climbed into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every sound in the house made me tense, listening for Jerome's car in the driveway or his key in the front door. Around 3 in the morning, I finally dozed off, exhausted from the emotional weight of the evening. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the guest room window and my phone showed it was almost 9 o'clock. I unlocked the door carefully and walked through the house again. Jerome's car still wasn't in the garage and his side of the bed in our room looked untouched. He hadn't come home at all. I made coffee in the kitchen, my hands shaking slightly as I filled the pot with water. My phone rang while I was pouring my first cup and Gianna's name appeared on the screen. I answered and she asked how I slept and whether Jerome had come back. I told her he never showed up and I had no idea where he spent the night. She was quiet for a moment, then asked if I wanted to meet her for breakfast at a cafe downtown called Rosie's. She said she didn't think I should be alone right now and she wanted to check on me in person. I agreed and told her I could be there in 30 minutes. The cafe was busy with the Saturday morning crowd when I arrived. Gianna was already seated at a corner table, 2 menus waiting. She stood up and hugged me as soon as she saw me, holding on longer than a casual acquaintance normally would. We sat down and ordered coffee and food, making small talk about the menu until the waiter left. Then Gianna leaned forward and asked me directly how I was really doing. I told her the truth, that I felt numb and angry and confused all at the same time. She nodded like she understood completely. Gianna started telling me about her own past, about a relationship she had in her early 20s with a man who constantly criticized her appearance and made her feel worthless. She said he would tell her she was lucky he stayed with her because no one else would want her. He isolated her from friends and family, making her believe she needed him to survive. It took her 2 years to finally leave, and only because her sister showed up at her apartment one day and refused to leave until Gianna packed her things. She said looking back now, she couldn't believe she let someone treat her that way for so long. But when you're in it, she explained, you don't see how bad things really are because the change happens gradually. I felt tears building behind my eyes because her story sounded so familiar, even though Jerome never called me names or told me I was ugly to my face. He just told everyone else, which somehow felt worse. Gianna reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She said her husband Enzo was a corporate lawyer who specialized in family law, and she had already talked to him about my situation this morning. He wanted to offer me a free consultation to explain my legal options, no pressure or obligation. I felt overwhelmed by her generosity. This woman I had just met last night who was treating me with more care and concern than my own husband had shown in years. I thanked her and said I would love to talk to Enzo, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do yet about my marriage. Gianna nodded and said that was completely normal, that I didn't have to make any big decisions right away. She gave me Enzo's business card and told me to call him whenever I felt ready, even if that was weeks or months from now. We finished breakfast and talked about lighter things, her modeling career and some of the funny moments from photo shoots. She made me laugh despite everything weighing on my mind, and I realized how much I had been missing real friendship. Jerome had slowly isolated me over the years without me even noticing, always making excuses why we couldn't attend social events, or why I shouldn't join activities where I might meet new people. Gianna walked me to my car and hugged me again before I left. She made me promise to text her later and let her know I was okay. I drove home feeling less alone than I had in a long time, even though my marriage was falling apart. Jerome's car was in the driveway when I pulled up around noon. My stomach clenched as I parked next to it and walked toward the front door. He was sitting on the couch in the living room, still wearing his tuxedo from last night, looking rumpled and exhausted. He stood up when I came in, his face pale and his eyes red. We stared at each other for a long moment before he finally spoke. He asked where I had been this morning, and I told him I had breakfast with a friend. He looked surprised, like he didn't know I had friends anymore. I sat down in the chair across from him, maintaining physical distance, and told him we needed to talk honestly for the first time in years. Jerome nodded and sank back onto the couch. He started talking, his words tumbling out fast like he had been rehearsing them all night. He admitted that he made up the story about me being ugly because he was insecure about having such an attractive wife. He said when we first got married, his coworkers would make comments about how beautiful I was and ask how he landed someone like me. It made him feel inadequate, like everyone was wondering what I saw in him. So he started telling people I wasn't feeling well and couldn't come to events. Then one day, Phil made a joke about Jerome keeping me hidden because I must be hideous, and instead of correcting him, Jerome laughed along. The lie grew from there, becoming easier each time he told it. He said he liked the sympathy and attention he got from his coworkers, the way they patted his shoulder and told him he was a good man for staying with someone so unfortunate looking. It made him feel special and valued in a way he hadn't felt before. I listened to his confession, feeling my anger build with each word. When he finally stopped talking, I told him that his insecurity didn't excuse 3 years of publicly humiliating me and lying to my face every time there was a company event. I said he had stolen experiences from me, made me miss out on parties and gatherings because he was too selfish and cowardly to deal with his own feelings. He had let his coworkers mock me, someone they had never even met, and he participated in those jokes for sympathy and attention. Jerome started crying, tears running down his face as he apologized over and over. He said he knew he had messed up badly and he wanted to make it right. He begged me to forgive him and give him another chance to be a better husband. I looked at him crying on the couch and felt nothing but anger and disgust. This man had spent 3 years building an elaborate lie that painted me as a monster while playing the victim to everyone we knew. His tears felt manipulative, like he was more upset about getting caught than about the actual harm he caused. I told him I couldn't talk to him right now because I was too angry to have a productive conversation. Jerome wiped his eyes and nodded, then dropped another bomb. He said Richard had called him this morning and suspended him from work pending an investigation into workplace conduct. The company took harassment seriously, even when the harassment was about someone who wasn't an employee. Several coworkers had already given statements to HR about Jerome's behavior and the jokes he made about me over the years. His job was at risk, possibly his entire career in the company. Jerome looked at me like he expected sympathy or comfort, but I just stood up and walked toward the guest room. I told him I needed space and time to figure out what I wanted, and he needed to give me that without pressuring me for answers I didn't have yet. I spent the next week in the guest room while Jerome tried to act like everything was normal. He'd knock on the door every morning asking if I wanted breakfast, leave flowers outside the room, slide apology notes under the door. I ignored all of it and focused on the modeling work Diana kept sending my way. She scheduled 3 photo shoots that week, each one paying more than I'd made in 6 months at my previous part-time job. The photographer for the skincare brand shoot told me I had perfect bone structure and asked if I'd done runway work before. I told him this was all new to me, and he seemed surprised. Richard called on Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing contracts Diana had sent over. His voice sounded tired when I answered. He apologized for not seeing what Jerome was doing sooner and said the company had finished their investigation. Jerome was terminated effective immediately for creating a hostile work environment and violating their ethics policies about workplace conduct. Richard said several employees had come forward with statements about Jerome's behavior over the years, not just about me, but about other inappropriate comments he'd made. The company took harassment seriously regardless of whether the target was an employee or not. I thanked Richard for handling it professionally, and he said he hoped I'd consider attending future company events as myself, not as a model hired for the occasion. Jerome came home that evening and I heard him throwing things in our bedroom. He eventually came to the guest room door and knocked, his voice shaking when he asked if we could talk. I opened the door and found him with red eyes and messy hair, looking nothing like the polished financial analyst who'd left for the gala 2 weeks ago. He begged me not to file for divorce and promised he'd go to therapy and change. He said losing his job made him realize how badly he'd messed up his entire life. I told him I needed space and time to figure out what I wanted. He started crying again and asked where I'd go. I said I was staying with Gianna temporarily, and he looked confused because he didn't know who that was. I packed 2 suitcases while he watched from the doorway, not saying anything else. Gianna and her husband Enzo lived in a beautiful townhouse downtown with huge windows and modern furniture. She'd offered to let me stay in their guest room as long as I needed. Enzo was a corporate lawyer who specialized in family law, and he'd already offered to give me free legal advice about my options. They welcomed me with warm hugs, and Gianna showed me to a spacious room with its own bathroom. That first night staying with them, I watched how they interacted during dinner. Enzo asked Gianna about her shoot that day, and actually listened to her answers, asking follow-up questions and seeming genuinely interested. Gianna told him about a difficult client meeting he'd had and offered supportive advice. They laughed together, touched each other casually, looked at each other with obvious affection. I realized I'd never had that kind of relationship with Jerome. We'd never supported each other's careers or communicated openly about anything real. Living with them showed me what a healthy relationship actually looked like. My skincare campaign launched the following week, and the response on social media was immediate and overwhelming. The brand's account posted photos from the shoot, and within hours I had thousands of comments calling me beautiful and asking who I was. Diana called me 3 times that day with new offers from other brands who wanted to work with me. A luxury watch company wanted me for their spring campaign. A high-end clothing brand needed models for their fall catalog. A jewelry designer wanted me as the face of their new collection. Element Agency offered me a long-term contract with multiple brands, and I realized modeling could actually be a real career for me, not just something I did to prove a point to Jerome. I signed the contract in Diana's office while Gianna cheered and Enzo reviewed the legal terms to make sure everything protected my interests. Jerome started sending flowers to Gianna's townhouse every week with handwritten apology letters. The first arrangement arrived on Monday with a card saying he was sorry and going to therapy twice a week. The second came on Friday with a longer letter about how he was working on his insecurity issues. I didn't respond to any of them. Enzo helped me file for legal separation to protect my assets while I decided about divorce. He explained that separation would prevent Jerome from making claims on my new modeling income and would establish a legal boundary while I figured out what I wanted long-term. The paperwork was straightforward, and Enzo handled everything professionally, never charging me despite his expertise being worth hundreds per hour. I started therapy the next week with a woman Gianna recommended. The therapist specialized in emotional abuse and relationship trauma. During our first session, she asked me to describe my marriage, and I found myself talking for the entire hour about Jerome's lies and the way he'd controlled my social life by keeping me isolated. She told me that Jerome's behavior was abuse, even though he never hit me or yelled at me. Emotional abuse was about control and manipulation, and making someone doubt their worth. I'd never thought of it that way before, but hearing her explain it made something click in my mind. Jerome had spent 3 years making me believe I wasn't good enough to be seen in public with him. He'd stolen experiences from me and made me feel grateful for the scraps of attention he gave me. The therapist said recognizing abuse was the first step toward healing from it. 3 months after the gala, I was thriving in ways I never imagined possible. I had my own apartment in a nice building near Element Agency's offices. Diana had become more than just my agent. She was a mentor who taught me about the industry and advocated for me with brands. Gianna was one of my closest friends, and we did shoots together whenever possible. My social media following had grown to over 50,000 people who seemed genuinely interested in my work. I'd done campaigns for 6 different brands and had bookings scheduled through the end of the year. Jerome's former coworkers started reaching out on social media around this time. Phil sent a long message apologizing for believing Jerome's lies and participating in jokes about me. He said Catherine had opened his eyes to how wrong it was, and he felt terrible about the whole thing. Richard's husband James sent a note saying he'd always felt uncomfortable with Jerome's comments, but didn't speak up when he should have. Several other people from the accounting department reached out with similar apologies. A few of them said they felt manipulated by how Jerome had played the victim for sympathy, making them feel sorry for him when he was actually the one causing harm. I appreciated the apologies but didn't engage much beyond thanking them for reaching out. A women's magazine contacted Diana asking if I'd be interested in doing an interview about finding my career later in life and leaving a relationship where I wasn't valued. I was nervous about sharing my story so publicly, but Diana thought it could help other women in similar situations. The interview happened at a coffee shop downtown with a journalist named Sarah who made me feel comfortable immediately. I told her everything about Jerome's lies, discovering the truth, showing up at the gala, and building a modeling career afterward. Sarah asked thoughtful questions about how I found the courage to leave and what advice I'd give other women. The article published 2 weeks later with photos from my campaigns. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of women commented on the magazine's website and social media sharing similar stories about partners who diminished them or controlled them or made them feel worthless. Women messaged me directly thanking me for speaking up and saying my story gave them courage to leave their own bad relationships. One woman said she'd been planning to stay with her husband who constantly criticized her appearance, but reading my interview made her realize she deserved better. Jerome showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning 3 months after I'd moved out. I was making coffee when the doorbell rang and I found him standing in the hallway looking thinner and tired. He said he'd been in therapy twice a week and his therapist had helped him understand how badly he'd hurt me. He talked about his insecurity and how it had poisoned everything good in his life. He said he realized now that he'd been emotionally abusive and he wanted to make amends. I listened to everything he said, and when he finished, I told him I appreciated that he was working on himself and getting help. Growth was important, and I was glad his therapist was helping him understand his behavior. But I wasn't interested in reconciling or giving him another chance. What he did wasn't something I could forgive or forget. He'd spent 3 years systematically destroying my self-worth while pretending to be a victim. He'd let his coworkers mock someone they'd never met. He'd stolen experiences from me because his ego was too fragile to handle having an attractive wife. I told him I hoped he continued therapy and became a better person, but that person wouldn't be with me. Jerome nodded slowly and asked if there was anything he could do to change my mind. I said no. He stood there for another minute like he wanted to say more, then turned and walked back down the hallway. I closed the door and went back to my coffee, feeling nothing but relief that the conversation was finally over. Diana called me 3 weeks later while I was between shoots at the agency. She asked if I'd be interested in speaking at a women's empowerment event downtown. The organizers wanted someone who could talk about reinventing yourself after difficult life changes. I felt my stomach twist with nerves. Public speaking wasn't something I'd ever done before. Diana said she understood if I wasn't ready, but she thought my story could really help women going through similar situations. I told her I'd think about it. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the messages I'd gotten after the magazine interview. Women thanking me for sharing my experience. Women saying they finally felt brave enough to leave bad relationships. I called Diana back the next morning and said yes. The event was at a hotel conference center with about 200 women in the audience. I stood backstage feeling sick to my stomach while the organizer introduced me. My hands were shaking when I walked out to the podium. I started by telling them about meeting Diana 6 months ago and turning down modeling because I believed what Jerome had spent years telling me. I explained how discovering his lies had forced me to see myself clearly for the first time. The audience was completely silent. I talked about showing up at the gala and watching Jerome's world fall apart when everyone saw the truth. I described the terror of leaving my marriage and moving in with Gianna. I admitted how scared I'd been to start modeling at my age. My voice cracked when I talked about reading messages from women who said my story gave them courage. I told them that leaving wasn't easy and rebuilding wasn't fast, but staying in a relationship where someone made you feel worthless was worse than any temporary struggle. The applause started before I even finished my last sentence. Women stood up clapping and several were crying. The organizer had to wait 5 minutes before she could thank me and dismiss everyone to the reception area. Afterward, women lined up to talk to me. A woman in her 50s grabbed my hands and said she'd been planning to stay with her husband who constantly criticized her weight. Reading my interview made her realize she deserved better. She'd filed for divorce 2 weeks ago. Another woman in her 30s said her boyfriend had been isolating her from friends and family for years. Hearing me talk about Jerome's control tactics helped her recognize the pattern. She was moving out next month. A younger woman, maybe 25, thanked me for speaking up about emotional abuse. She said people always focused on physical violence, but psychological cruelty was just as damaging. My story validated what she'd been going through with her partner. I hugged at least 30 women that night. Diana stood nearby, watching with tears in her eyes. She told me later she'd never been prouder of anyone in her life. I drove home feeling exhausted, but also lighter somehow. Sharing my story publicly had been terrifying, but knowing it helped other women made everything I'd been through feel meaningful. Enzo called me the next week. He said if I wanted to move forward with divorce, now was a good time. Jerome's lawyer had been contacting him about settlement discussions. Jerome apparently wanted to handle everything quickly and quietly. I met Enzo at his office downtown to go over paperwork. He explained that California was a no-fault divorce state, so we didn't need to prove Jerome's behavior. We just needed to divide assets fairly and file the proper documents. Jerome had already signed papers agreeing not to contest anything. His lawyer was pushing hard for a fast settlement. Enzo thought Jerome wanted to avoid more public embarrassment. I signed everything Enzo put in front of me. My hand was steady. I felt nothing but relief watching my signature appear on the divorce petition. Enzo filed the papers that afternoon. He said the waiting period was 6 months minimum, but with Jerome cooperating, it should be straightforward. I walked out of Enzo's office into bright sunshine, feeling like I could breathe properly for the first time in years. 6 months later, I sat in a courthouse waiting room while a judge reviewed our settlement. Jerome was there with his lawyer, but we didn't speak or make eye contact. The whole hearing took 20 minutes. The judge approved our asset division, signed the final decree, and it was over. I was officially divorced. Jerome got half our savings and his car. I got half our savings, my car, and kept all my modeling income. We sold the house and split the proceeds evenly. I was financially stable between my half of our assets and my agency contracts. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt absolutely nothing toward Jerome except relief that he was no longer my problem. Diana called me into her office the following week. She said Element Agency wanted to promote me to senior model status. The position came with a pay increase and new responsibilities. She also wanted me to help mentor new talent, especially women who were starting modeling careers later in life. I loved the idea immediately. Diana said my experience and perspective would be valuable for women who felt too old or unsure about entering the industry. I could help them navigate contracts, build confidence, and avoid predatory situations. I accepted the promotion on the spot. My first mentee was a woman named Rebecca, who was 38 and newly divorced. She reminded me so much of myself 6 months ago. Scared but determined. Beautiful but convinced she wasn't. I spent hours with her going over agency procedures, helping her prepare for test shoots and talking through her insecurities. Watching her confidence grow over the next few weeks felt more rewarding than any campaign I'd done. I ran into Phil and Catherine at an Italian restaurant downtown 2 months after my divorce finalized. I was there with Gianna celebrating her birthday. Catherine spotted me first and came over to our table. She asked if she could talk to me for a minute. I excused myself and followed her to a quieter corner near the bar. Catherine apologized again for not questioning Jerome's story sooner. She said Phil felt terrible about participating in the jokes. He'd been much more aware of workplace dynamics since everything happened. He actually spoke up now when people made inappropriate comments. She said seeing what Jerome did to me had opened both their eyes about casual cruelty disguised as humor. I thanked her for telling me. Phil came over looking nervous and apologized directly. He said he'd been thoughtless and cruel, and he was genuinely sorry for believing Jerome's lies and making them worse. I told him I appreciated the apology. We talked for a few more minutes about work and life, and it was surprisingly pleasant. They invited me to join them for dessert, but I declined and went back to Gianna. She asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. Those apologies didn't erase what happened, but they helped close that chapter. Enzo called me a week later with an unusual request. Jerome's therapist wanted to know if I'd be willing to participate in a therapy session. Apparently, Jerome's recovery process included making direct amends to people he'd hurt. The therapist thought having me there might help Jerome work through his guilt and shame. I told Enzo absolutely not. Jerome's healing wasn't my responsibility. I'd already spent 3 years managing his emotions and insecurities. His therapy was his own work to do. Enzo said he'd expected that answer and would relay my decision. He also said I shouldn't feel guilty about refusing. Setting boundaries was healthy, especially with someone who'd caused so much damage. I thanked him and hung up feeling completely at peace with my choice. I started dating again casually a few months after the divorce. Nothing serious, just dinner or coffee with people I met through work or friends. It felt strange at first being with someone new. But it also felt amazing to be with people who appreciated me openly, who wanted to be seen with me in public, who treated me with basic respect and kindness. I went on dates with a photographer who complimented my intelligence, a marketing consultant who asked genuine questions about my life, an architect who introduced me to his friends proudly. None of these relationships became serious, but each one reminded me what normal treatment looked like. The skincare brand called Diana in late spring. They wanted to renew my contract for another year and expand my role in their international campaign. I'd be featured in advertisements across 3 countries, including billboards in major cities. Diana negotiated an even better rate than my original contract. I signed the renewal agreement feeling slightly surreal. A year ago, I'd been hiding at home believing I was too ugly to be seen. Now my face would be on billboards in 3 countries. Gianna and I got hired for a joint campaign celebrating female friendship. The fashion brand wanted authentic connections between their models, not fake-posed relationships. Our genuine friendship showed in every photo. We laughed through the entire shoot. The photographer kept saying our chemistry was perfect. The campaign images were beautiful. Gianna and I looking natural and happy together. The brand used them in magazines, online, and in the store displays. Working with my best friend was effortless and fun. The campaign did well enough that the brand asked us to do a follow-up series 6 months later. I started house hunting the week after my divorce papers arrived. My lawyer had secured a fair settlement, and with my modeling income steady, I could afford something nice. The real estate agent showed me a condo in a neighborhood with tree-lined streets and small cafes on every corner. The building had big windows that let in natural light all day. I signed the papers that afternoon. Moving day felt like shedding old skin. I donated most of the furniture from my marriage to charity and started fresh. The living room got a cream-colored sofa with throw pillows in deep blue. I hung artwork I actually liked on the walls, not the boring prints Jerome had chosen. The bedroom became my sanctuary with soft bedding and a reading chair by the window. I painted the spare room a warm yellow and set it up as a home office. Every choice was mine alone. No compromising, no asking permission, no worrying if someone else would approve. Walking through my condo each morning made me genuinely happy. Diana called me into her office 3 weeks later with exciting news. Paris Fashion Week was coming up, and 2 emerging designers wanted Element models for their shows. She thought I'd be perfect for both collections. The shows would be smaller productions, not the massive runway events, but still legitimate Fashion Week appearances. I'd need to fly to Paris for 5 days. My hands shook as I held the plane ticket she handed me. 6 months ago, I'd been hiding at home believing Jerome's lies about my appearance. Now I was flying to Paris to walk in Fashion Week shows. The whole thing felt surreal. Paris was everything I'd imagined and more. The designers were young and passionate about their work. The first show featured flowing dresses in natural fabrics. The second was more structured pieces with interesting cuts. Walking down those runways with cameras flashing and industry people watching felt like living in a dream. After the second show, the designer hugged me and said I'd brought exactly the energy she wanted for her collection. Backstage, other models exchanged contact information and talked about future collaborations. I kept thinking about that day Diana had approached me downtown with her business card. Taking that chance had completely changed my life. The letter from Jerome arrived while I was unpacking from Paris. His handwriting on the envelope made my stomach tense until I opened it and read the contents. He'd written 3 pages apologizing for everything he'd done. He acknowledged lying to his coworkers, humiliating me publicly, and destroying our marriage through his own insecurity and cruelty. The letter explained he was moving to another city for a fresh start. He'd been in therapy working through his issues and realized he needed to make amends. The final paragraph wished me well and said he hoped I could find happiness. I read it twice, then put it in a drawer. His apology didn't erase 3 years of pain, but it felt like real closure. He was moving on, and so was I. A documentary filmmaker contacted Element Agency looking for women to interview about reinventing their lives after major challenges. Diana suggested me and I agreed to participate. The filming took place over 2 days at my condo and at Element's offices. I told my story on camera, talking about discovering Jerome's lies, finding modeling, and rebuilding my life. Sharing everything publicly felt strange at first. But as I spoke, I realized I wasn't ashamed anymore. I was proud of how far I'd come. The filmmaker said my story would inspire other women facing similar situations. When the documentary premiered online 3 months later, it got thousands of views. Women messaged me saying my experience gave them courage to leave bad relationships or pursue dreams they'd given up on. Diana asked me to lunch at her favorite restaurant downtown. Over salads, she explained that Element Agency was growing fast and needed help managing new talent. She wanted to offer me a partnership position. I'd help recruit models, develop their careers, and handle some of the business operations. The modeling work would continue, but I'd also build a career beyond just being in front of cameras. My role would include mentoring new models and helping shape the agency's direction. The salary she proposed was generous. I accepted immediately, excited about this new challenge. Building something beyond my own modeling career felt meaningful and important. My first major project as partner was creating a mentorship program for women transitioning into modeling later in life. Too many women thought modeling was only for teenagers and early 20s. I wanted to change that perception and help women who'd been told they were too old or not the right type. We announced the program on Element's website and social media. Applications flooded in within days. Dozens of women wrote about always wanting to model but thinking they'd missed their chance. Some were coming out of difficult marriages like mine. Others were simply ready to try something new. We selected 10 women for our first group and started training them in runway walking, posing, and working with photographers. Catherine called and suggested we meet for dinner. We'd stayed in touch since the gala, but this felt different. Over pasta at an Italian place, she told me she was grateful everything had come out about Jerome. Watching the truth unfold had opened her eyes to problems she'd been ignoring in her own life. She'd started questioning other situations where she'd accepted bad behavior as normal. We talked for 3 hours about marriage, friendship, and growth. By the end of dinner, I realized we'd become genuine friends. We made plans to meet monthly, and those dinners became something I looked forward to each month. Element Agency co-sponsored another charity event 6 months after the original gala. I arrived early to help set up, wearing a different designer gown from my growing collection. A photographer was adjusting his camera equipment near the entrance. He looked up when I walked past, then did a double take. He introduced himself as Kian and asked if I'd be willing to let him take some candid shots during the event for his portfolio. His approach was respectful and professional. We talked between his shots and I found him easy to talk to. He treated me like a person, not just a pretty face. At the end of the night, he asked if I'd like to get coffee sometime. I said yes. We started dating slowly, just casual dinners and walks in the park. He never made me feel like I needed to hide or change anything about myself. 1 year after the gala that changed everything, Element Agency threw a celebration at their offices. Diana had insisted on marking my first year as both a model and partner. The conference room was decorated with photos from my various campaigns and runway shows. Diana gave a speech about how proud she was of my growth and contributions to the agency. She talked about the mentorship program's success and how I'd helped recruit several talented new models. Standing there listening, I felt genuinely moved. This woman had believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I looked around the room at all the people who'd become important in my life. Gianna stood near the food table laughing with Enzo. Catherine was chatting with some of the newer models from my mentorship program. Diana caught my eye and smiled. Kian squeezed my hand supportively. A year ago, I'd been trapped in a marriage where I was hidden and mocked. Now I was surrounded by people who valued and respected me. I had a career I loved, genuine friendships, and someone who treated me with kindness. My life was completely different, and I was genuinely happy. Kian suggested Italy in early spring when the tourists hadn't arrived yet, and the light would be perfect for photography. We landed in Rome and spent 3 days wandering through ancient streets while he captured me against crumbling stone walls and fountains that had stood for centuries. He photographed me laughing at a street vendor's joke, sitting on Spanish steps eating gelato, standing in doorways of buildings older than our country. Every photo showed someone comfortable in her own skin. Someone beautiful not despite her features, but because of them. Being with someone who wanted to show me off instead of hiding me away felt strange at first, then wonderful, then completely natural. In Florence, we walked across the Ponte Vecchio at sunset, and he took pictures of me with golden light streaming through my hair. That night over dinner, he told me he'd never met anyone who transformed so completely when they smiled, and I believed him because he'd been showing me proof through his lens for days. Back home, I threw myself into the mentorship program with renewed energy. 3 women from our first group were ready to start booking real jobs, and watching them prepare for their first professional shoots reminded me of my own nervous excitement 2 years ago. I helped them practice poses, taught them how to work with difficult photographers, shared every trick Diana and Gianna had taught me about staying calm under pressure. One woman named Sarah had left an emotionally abusive marriage similar to mine, and seeing her discover her own strength and beauty made all the work worthwhile. She booked a campaign for a local boutique and called me crying happy tears after her first shoot went perfectly. Giving back to women who'd walked similar paths felt more meaningful than any magazine cover or billboard campaign ever could. Diana invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown, and I knew something big was coming from the way she kept smiling mysteriously over her wine. Element Agency was opening a second location across town to handle our growing client roster, and she wanted me to help run it. The position would mean less modeling and more administrative work, recruiting new talent, managing contracts, mentoring models beyond just our program. I'd be a partner in the business, shaping the agency's future, and building something lasting. I accepted immediately, excited by the challenge and the chance to expand what we'd started. 2 years had passed since that charity gala where everything changed. I lived in a condo I'd decorated myself, worked at a job that fulfilled me, spent time with friends who genuinely cared about me, and dated someone who celebrated rather than diminished me. My calendar was full of modeling shoots, mentorship sessions, business meetings, and dinner plans with people who valued my company. I'd built a life I genuinely loved, surrounded by respect and appreciation instead of mockery and shame. Sometimes I thought about Jerome and felt grateful his lies had been exposed because they'd forced me to discover potential I never knew I had. His cruelty had accidentally set me free to become someone stronger, more confident, and infinitely happier than the woman who'd believed his excuses and accepted his treatment. I'd transformed my life completely, and every single day I woke up thankful for the journey that had brought me here.